Hi, welcome everyone to Critica NYC. Here we are again. This week we are joined by Diane Morales, who is a New York City mayoral candidate. And we're very excited to be speaking with her today. For me, this is a particularly exciting one, you know, being a second generation Latina born and raised in New York City, to be able to see someone, right, that looks like me, that it was also born and raised in New York City, Puerto Rican parents, who has committed herself to doing work in the community. And we definitely want to hear more. There hasn't been a long history of many Latinos who have run for mayor. I believe, you know, we had Freddie Ferrer who ran for mayor, and there's always been other names of Latinos who would run for the position, but for some reason, never was able to follow through. And so, you know, 2020 has been shaping up to be a very interesting year. Who knows what 2021 will be? So I would love to hear more from Diane about, you know, how's it been going on the campaign trail, especially with COVID and the pandemic and all of the challenges that we have had with, you know, being able to run a campaign with the current climate. So Diane, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me, Raquel. It's a pleasure to be here. So it sounds like you want me to talk about why I got into this and what's going on, right?
Yes, please, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself. And yeah, what made you, you know, make the decision to throw your hat in the ring?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, I am a first generation Boricua, born and raised in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn. I'm the youngest of three daughters, but the youngest by like almost a generation. There's 9 and 7 years between me and my older sisters. You know, I was very lucky as a child actually to have access to. I did well in school and I had access to increasingly elite educational institutions. And, you know, I think as I got older, I realized that there weren't a lot of kids that looked like us in those classrooms and in those spaces. And so I became aware at a really young age that there was something up with the system because I didn't feel like I was smarter than a lot of the kids from the neighborhood that I was growing up with. So you know, I remember feeling really at a young age that I wanted to do something to change that, but not really understanding a lot of the systems or what was going on. And so, you know, I was a special education teacher in Bed-Stuy at the same school where I went to kindergarten. Yeah, and then I was a foster care worker, a caseworker in the foster care system. But, you know, those things really, actually, it was my experience teaching where I didn't have any experience. I wasn't trained, and I was teaching in what was then a special education classroom that was the most restrictive environment. But I was really enthusiastic and I loved my kids and I really wanted to do well. And I was full of questions and energy. And one day my assistant principal said to me, I don't care what you do with those kids, just keep them in the classroom, keep them quiet and keep the door shut. Okay. And it was that day that I realized that, you know, our children's future were in the hands of some people who really didn't care. And I wanted to do something, right? So, I mean, you know, long story short, I then started like this journey of searching and went to graduate school. And, you know, I ended up ultimately being pretty successful as the executive officer of you know, an anti-poverty organization in the Bronx. But the more successful you are doing that work, the more you realize that the problem is bigger than, you know, whatever one intervention or service that you can provide for a family. because, you know, they line up. And so I started thinking about what I could do on a different scale. I've also been, a single mother. I'm a single mom of two kids, two young adults who are now in college. So I also had to navigate challenges. Both of them have learning differences. They had IEPs. I had to fight for them. I had to sue the Department of Education. My son's been racially profiled, like on the corner, right around the corner from our house. My daughter struggled with mental health challenges. So I got a front row seat, personally and professionally, to the barriers and challenges. And, I think that it's time for us to be represented at a systemic level where we can have a voice there that understands the experiences of a lot of people in our communities and who is unapologetic about trying to push for change and who doesn't owe anything to anybody from, the political system. And so I decided to jump in. I had no idea at that time that COVID was going to take place, and transform and change our lives so fundamentally in such an unprecedented way. But the flip side of that is that I think COVID has made it clear why it is necessary for us to create a whole new social contract and get rid of the old playbook and the old structures and the old systems, because they were working exactly the way they were intended, which means they weren't working for a lot of us. And so to me, it feels like we have a window right now, as difficult as things have been, we have a window to really push for a fundamental structural and systemic overhaul. I'll stop there.
I took a look at your website and at your platform and the various issues that you're running your campaign on. How about we start and talk a little bit about education? You were telling me about your own experience with yourself and with your children in the public school system in New York. Right now it's very challenging with the issue of the virus. Having children go back to school. The UFT has been in negotiations with the mayor and the chancellor. Things are kind of moving along. I myself, for example, I have a 7-year-old daughter. She's in remote learning. It has been, quite a challenge because, I have to, because of her age and her grade, I literally have to sit next to her for 4 or 5 hours to make sure that she's paying attention, that she's doing what she needs to do. And I myself am kind of rethinking, okay, what do we need to be doing that's going to really work for us, right, and, and our family. I would love to hear, I would love to hear more from you about your thoughts, about COVID, education, and, and the big issue of, the thing that has come up for us, it has been the issue of class size and not having enough physical space for the students.
Yep. I mean, I feel like I have been sort of shouting into the void about this for months now. So one of the things I did at my last job was to actually run a lot of community school programs. Community schools was an initiative of the last administration where certain schools got partnered with community-based organizations to provide additional services and additional academic support and services for families and the community. The first thing I think we needed to do, the administration needed to do, was to leverage those partnerships. There are, tens, if not hundreds of nonprofit community-based organizations that are already accustomed to working with schools, that already have basic partnerships with schools, and many of whom also have space and facilities of their own. So the first thing I would have done on some level would have been to leverage those partnerships and think about almost like deputizing those community-based organizations to act as schools, so that it takes care of kind of the square footage issue, right, in terms of the social distancing concern, that, that we all have and are also worried about. A lot of those organizations already had some sort of internal instructional capacity, teaching staff, that kind of thing. Or at the very least, people who could provide developmental and social emotional supports to our children, who we all know are, struggling right now with this, the adults are struggling. So of course our children are struggling. That we all have and are also worried about. And so I think that would have been critical to partner with those schools. I think the other thing is with those organizations, I think the other thing is, and I'm addressing specifically education at this moment in time, right? Not just leveraging those community-based organizations, leveraging a lot of our arts and cultural institutions as well, many of which also have robust education programming and facilities. So, yes, it would have taken some planning and some time, but we could have started that in March, back when the schools first closed down. The last sort of thing I'll say about this that I think is a tremendous missed opportunity, and but who knows how long this will last anyway. One of the things that the virtual learning does for us is it provides the opportunity for us to experiment with desegregating our classrooms. Because if students are, learning online anyway, there's no reason why we couldn't put a student in Bed-Stuy, which is where I am, in a classroom with a student from the Upper East Side, right? So, that allows for we could get rid of the geographic boundaries, and we know so much of our destiny these days is dictated by the zip code that we're born into or live in. And we could really sort of have, experimented with an option of kind of like really, really deconstructing that notion that, that students are tied to their zip code in that way. I honestly think that parents and families would have been willing to try anything as long as they felt like their kids were being safe, and that there was some real instructional support and education happening. I can't imagine being a parent of a school-aged child right now. I don't know what your days are possibly like, as you're trying to juggle getting your job done and also supervising instruction.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge, and that also kind of brings me to the level of what parent engagement, or actually really non-parent engagement, there has been in this process, leading up to now, where my thing has been like, it would be wonderful, for example, like even for the state to reconsider homeschooling and the homeschooling requirements, right? And do kind of like a pandemic homeschooling where parents are really given the tools that they need to be able to teach their children at home. And maybe the classroom, the teachers really should be teaching the parents, and then we could be doing what we need to do with our kids, right? I think that would also be very helpful. Since we're already here with them, 4 or 5 hours. But let's kind of move into a different topic, because I know education, we can go on and on talking about the various issues around education. I definitely, tonight is going to be the first presidential debate. And everyone is thinking about what's going to happen on November 3rd, what is going to be the future of our country. And there's a lot of issues on the table, and all of those things will impact New York City directly. I would love to hear from you a little bit about your thoughts on this election, on what are the issues on the table that are really going to impact New York City. I mean, we're already feeling it, right? With the fact that there has been no allocations yet for New York City specifically, and for New York State that has been so hard hit by the virus. And so this is going to mean, right, a lot of budget cuts, you know, a lot of different policy issues that's really going to hurt a lot of New Yorkers. I would love to hear more from you about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think the November elections and the impending sort of outcome of that is on all of our minds, and presents a real threat to, you know, to our city and to the residents here in the city. I actually think that, you know, no matter what the outcome, we're going to have to, you know, rally the troops, so to speak, because I think it's not going to be an easy fix no matter what. But, you know, I was having this conversation with someone else earlier today, and they asked me a similar question. And my response is, you know, essentially like the next administration, the next mayor, when I am mayor, you know, I think it's really important to think about the role as a fierce advocate and kind of warrior for New York City. I think, you know, we have to preserve our status as a sanctuary city. We have to create a bubble, if you will, where all of our residents feel protected, right? You know, the thing that has happened a couple of times where, you know, NYPD is cooperating with ICE, that has to be nipped in the bud. That is not, you know, that cannot be.
The government has labeled New York City as an anarchist jurisdiction. I mean,
they ain't seen nothing yet, if that's what they think.
Yeah.
You know, because we're going to have to really, really dig our heels in. You know, if we have to go through a second administration, we're going to have to really dig our heels in to not just, you know, to not just take care of the city, but to take care of each other. And that's also part of what I think is the fundamental kind of new social contract that we really have to be thinking about as a city, right? Like this whole idea that the wealthy are taking off and leaving everybody behind. You know, we have low-income communities and communities of color have a long tradition and a long history of taking care of each other. You know, there's a reason why a lot of the chants in the protests, you know, that involve, you know, the diverse coalition of people that have been uprising. One of the chants is "We keep us safe." Right? You know, that idea of taking care of each other. There's a reason why so many mutual aid groups have, you know, popped up and proliferated across the city. We are not going to, you know, stand idly by and allow our city to be taken down. I think that, you know, it is going to be critical for the mayor to really, really lead on that and to really be a loud voice in terms of advocating and defending and protecting the city. That's what I think. I think we are in for a long, long haul. But I don't think, you know, yes, this is difficult. But if anybody could do it, New York can do it. And I also think that, you know, if we end up having to deal with a second term, New York should lead the way, right? Not just in terms of how we take care of each other, but in building alliances with other cities that also want to resist, right? Because there's a lot to be said for the idea that where New York goes, lots of places follow. You know, people want to, there are cities that want to have all of the great things that we have, which is mostly our people. But I think that there's a role for New York to play in kind of helping to lead the resistance, to put it in, what is it, Star Wars terms.
Well, you know, so let's talk a little bit about like where you see yourself in terms of the field, right? When it comes to, you know, the other candidates that are out there, right? You know, I'm hearing you speak and it's wonderful. You sound, you know, you're very progressive. You've been doing progressive work for many, many years. You know, right, when we look at some of our past mayors, you know, we've had billionaires. We've had, the Mano Duro with Giuliani. And then, we've had people who are not like, right, born and raised in New York City, right? Like our current mayor. So can you tell us a little bit about, how do you see the field right now and how do you stand out in that field?
Sure. Sure. I mean, I think the first thing that I would say in terms of the field is that I am not part of the establishment by any means, in any shape, or form. I don't come from the machine. I'm not part of party politics. I'm not part of the establishment. And I think what the first thing that means actually is that I am much more like the average New Yorker than anyone else in the race. And I think there is something to be said for, as we think about moving forward and the idea of creating a new social contract, what are the implications of that in terms of what our leadership needs to look like and what our leadership needs to reflect. And I think it needs to be completely different from anything that we've had historically. And that means moving away from the party establishment and the ones that have been positioning themselves or being strategic or, the ones who charted their path 20 years ago, or the ones that are coming from within, right? I think that's the first thing. The other thing that I think is, the way that I would lead, I mean, as someone who's come from the community and like I said, has more lived experience in common with the average New Yorker than not, I also have experience problem solving for the community in partnership with the community. And I'm a strong believer that the people closest to the problem are also closest to the solution. There's no like hero or savior that's going to come in and, wave the flag and save the day for us. This is going to have to be a collective effort that is led by all of us together and in true partnership. And that is, I've been relatively successful in the roles that I've had. And it was based on the fact that I am able to identify, and build partnerships and alliances to work towards a common goal, right? And that those things have been, because you do develop that in partnership, and in a collective way, everybody then feels a sense of investment in the success and the outcomes. And, there's nothing like fighting for something that you believe in or working towards something that you believe in. That's different, right? I'm not talking top down. Really, it has to come from the ground and in partnership with the ground. And then I guess the other thing I would say that I think distinguishes me is related to that, which is that I've actually run organizations and managed organizations. And I think that, with large budgets and large staff, right, being able to do that means understanding how you get everybody on the same page. It means understanding how you get, everybody to the place where they understand the role that they play in working towards a shared vision. And they understand the value that they bring to the table, no matter what role they're playing. It also means, making hard decisions and doing hard things like managing big budgets. In the nonprofit sector, you get reimbursed like 78 cents per every dollar you spend. So you have to kind of figure out how to make magic with money. And those skills are going to be necessary in the next administration. You're going to have to figure out how you prioritize budget stuff, how you close gaps, and how you do, in many ways, more with less. I'm sorry, I'm sitting by a window.
No, don't worry about it. That's the natural part of all of this.
It's New York City. I'm in New York City. In any event.
Yeah, so talking about the budgets, I'm sure you've had extensive experience dealing with, getting funding for your organization, managing that money, negotiating with, all of the different players, from the city council members to the mayor to whoever is administrating your contract. And that is something that a lot of nonprofit organizations, always talk about, is this issue of really getting the support and this issue of contracting and being able to get your money on time and getting paid on time to be able to function. So can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel like you would address those issues in your administration?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, there's a couple of things that come top of mind, right? One is that the nonprofit sector, the human services sector, has been trained to operate on a scarcity mindset. The idea that there isn't enough money for all of us, we have to compete against each other, and even when we win the contract, we're still not gonna be paid what we're spending on whatever the service is. So I think in many ways, having someone like me as mayor would create for them someone who understands firsthand the challenges that they're dealing with, right? So the idea of actually paying them for their services, which, by the way, the city is capable of doing for for-profit businesses. So why not? There's a different set of rules that seems to apply for the nonprofit sector, even though the service that they're providing is literally, in so many instances, about human lives, right? So I think there's something to be said for prioritizing those supports and that thing. The other thing is, very often we don't get paid. I still say we. Very often they don't get paid until 6, 7, 9, 12 months after the fact, right? Even when you're getting supposed advances, the advances are coming in 3 months after the contract date started, right? So, and yet, from what I understand, I could be misspeaking here, but I was told just the other day that cultural institutions actually get advances, like in real time. I don't know if that's true, but I also feel like, we would have to prioritize giving organizations, nonprofit organizations, a real advance, meaning before they're expected to deliver any services. And that's not the way things are.
A lot of our nonprofits are the essential workers. They're the ones
Absolutely
helping on the front line, throughout this whole pandemic. They are there. They're still there.
That's right.
I see a lot of, my friends, colleagues that are out there, making sure that people are getting food, that people are staying in their homes, just a myriad of issues that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so, that brings me for us to talk a little bit about, affordable housing and, tenants' rights. I would love, to hear from you, where you are on those issues, right? Right now, I believe, right, there's been another extension, right,
Yep.
in terms of folks not being taken to court to be evicted on the moratorium. But there, at some point, that will end. And there will be a whole host of issues at that point. I would love to hear, from you, where you stand and, how to deal with that, because both tenants and landlords are being, impacted.
Right. So as much of a relief as the extension of the eviction moratorium might be, it's really just kicking the can down the road, right? It's just like, prolonging the inevitable. And for people for tenants in particular, who are, unable to pay their rent, it's not doing anything to alleviate their anxiety around, what's ultimately going to come when all of a sudden they're being held accountable for 9 months or 10 months of rent that they may not, that they don't have. I think we need to be, first of all, I'm a believer in housing as a human right. I mean, period. There's plenty of vacant real estate in New York City to house everyone several times over. And second of all, I think that, I think we need to find a way to bring relief to tenants, right, and absolve them of the rent responsibilities, while also taking care of, in particular, the small homeowners. I'm very concerned about I'm making this up, but like, the elderly African American woman in Bed-Stuy who might own a brownstone and might be, renting an apartment, her basement, her garden apartment to someone, but relies on that income to pay her taxes and her utilities, right? So we also have to be able to provide relief to smaller homeowners. I'm not talking about the, big time luxury developers who, have, hundreds of units. That could be written off as their contribution to the recovery efforts. But I'm talking about taking care of the tenants and taking care of the homeowners that really are vulnerable at this point in time. And I think, we can figure out kind of, is that homeowners of 3 units and under? Is it 6 units and under? What is that, right? But it's the small town folks. It's not the big, high-rise towers that have had, luxury apartments vacant anyway since pre-pandemic without any penalties, right? So that's what I think we need to think about. I think we need to be thinking about how we repurpose vacant spaces and make them available so that whether it's temporary or longer term, midterm, whatever, so that people also have a roof over their heads, because homelessness becomes a public health issue. And in the middle of a pandemic, displacing people is highly problematic. It's only going to make things worse.
Yeah. I mean, and that's just an overall issue that the state and the city is going to be facing, right? Is this loss of population. You have a lot of people leaving. They were leaving even before the pandemic. Now the pandemic has pushed out a lot of New Yorkers. And so that will also, I'm sure, will have its impacts as we look at what happens with the census. And we look at, how all of that is going to translate, down the road. Can you, speak to us a little bit? One of the things that stood out to me as I was looking at your website is that you had like really front and center the Black Lives Matter and the defund the police. Can you talk to us a little bit about, your stance on that issue? I know it's very controversial, but I think as we're talking about now, like, for example, this issue of like nonprofits and reducing services and having to kind of really look at budgets in that way, right, in terms of what we need and what we no longer need. If you can talk a little bit about, where you are with that.
Right. I guess the first thing I'll say is that policing does not equal public safety. And, we need to really decouple those ideas as we educate, I think, the public and the community about those things, right? The history of policing and how policing was established, in terms of, it's a descendant of the slave patrols and chattel slavery, and the police. That whole thing was intended to protect property, and the slaves were seen as property, and so it was to protect and preserve the property of the white man, which was a slave, right? You can't. It's really, really hard to talk about tinkering around the edges of an institution that is grounded in the dehumanization of one person over the other, right? So, and the reality of it's today is that, police don't prevent crime. Police don't show up until after the crime, right? If there's in fact a real crime. And in communities where there's, over policing, those are the communities where the police actually create the most harm, and where residents report feeling the most unsafe. So we can't equate the police presence with making and keeping people safe. When we did an exercise, my campaign did an exercise a couple of months ago, and we had people close their eyes and envision a safe community. And then we created a Wordle. We had them just like, tell us one word of what you see in your community. And it was parks. and it was recreation services, and it was healthcare, and it was all of these things that had nothing to do with police. So, when we are faced with, in the era of videotaping, where we have access to so much evidence of police brutality and anti-Blackness, it is really, really important for us to put a stake in the ground and say, no más, right? And when you think about what we, the citizens, what Black communities contribute in taxes to pay for overtime or over policing, which then in turn turns into the murder of their own, of people in our own communities. It's clear to me that we need to fundamentally transform that model. And what I have called for is the creation of a community first responders department. And, that would entail creating a separate unit, because the other thing is that I think it's over 90% of the calls that police respond to are actually not crimes. It's homeless issues, it's mental health issues, it's substance abuse issues. And so what would it look like if we actually had a team of trained personnel who knew how to respond to the issue, right? And would de-escalate and provide supports and services to help those people in a different kind of way, right? As the mother of a young man who has been profiled multiple times, and as someone who watched, actually, we were at the protest at Barclays at the end of May, the first George Floyd protest. And as we were marching, my children and I were kettled by police, and one of the police officers targeted my son and started to assault him in front of me. That was after I watched both of my children get pepper sprayed, unprovoked, right? So, you can't sort of deal with part of the system. You really have to sort of overhaul the whole thing. And I am a strong believer that we need a whole new model, and that the model of public safety should really be about reallocating resources back into the community for the services and supports that our communities need first, because I also believe that will make a significant impact on any incidents that take place. And then we'll see what we need in terms of real policing. But I would literally bet money on the idea that it would be significantly reduced. And that's what I believe in.
Yeah, I think, the policing issue is really interesting to me because, when I think of my own experience, around issues of policing, when I first started my career, I was a tenant organizer with the Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition. Oh. And I worked in Mount Hope. And it was a very interesting community. One of the women that was very involved on the board had been doing a lot of work around, pushing out drugs out of the community and really calling on the police to police, right, when it came to the issues of drug dealing, on the streets. And, and then, fast forward, and then you look at the flip side, right? Then the flip side is then the police will exert their power in situations where there may be no need to exert that power, right? And so it's like, we do really need to think about, we're not necessarily saying we're going to eradicate policing, right?
Right.
But there is a need, there is work to be done. It's just that work is something that really needs to be community led, and it's not necessarily just the police coming in to police.
That's right. I mean, there's also plenty of programs that have shown promising results in terms of, peer-to-peer interventions for the scenarios like the one you were just describing, right? The Cure Violence program has actually been really effective. I'm not sure why we're not expanding that, in terms of, gang, gun violence, that kind of stuff, where it's like a peer intervention program, not always a peer, somebody older who's been through what you're going through and can reach you. Because the reality of it is that a lot of that violence you know, when it's real crime, is born out of all of these other needs. And so, you know, it's hard to focus on the symptom, right, if you're not really dealing with the cause. And I think fundamentally that's the bottom line of what the sort of defund movement speaks to, is the need to really address the causes, the root causes of the disparities that exist, by providing the resources that are necessary.
Yeah, so how is it coming along for you in terms of, you know, building your base, building support for your campaign, you know, right? You're taking this particular stance. So obviously we know you're not going to get the endorsement of the police department. So
Nor am I seeing it.
so, you know, how do you, you know, see that being built into your candidacy?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start off by saying this. In the July filing, you know, because all the campaigns had to file in July, my campaign for that filing far outpaced every other mayoral campaign in terms of the number of New York City residents that contributed to the campaign. And to me, that is worth its weight in gold, because what that means is that New Yorkers are hearing my message, and there's something about what I'm talking about that is resonating with people that live in New York City. Now, there were plenty of other candidates who had a lot more money raised from outside of New York City or from big donations, but our donations were smaller, and they were from New York City residents. So, you know, that to me is like a big sign. It's also a source of pride, to be honest, because that's what I'm looking to do, is to represent and elevate the voices of average New Yorkers. So, you know, that's that reality. But the other side of it is that, the flip side of that is that, you know, I am working to basically engage the community that I want to represent in the electoral process. And, you know, and that means not just the sort of grassroots activists, you know, and advocates, but also, you know, the tío or the cousin who has gotten somewhat disillusioned with electoral politics and doesn't believe that it reflects them and that it doesn't represent them. Those are the people that I'm trying to reach, right? Like I want to create a belief in a new kind of possibility among folks that have just felt like they don't care about me, and they're not listening to me, and, you know, and so why should I engage, right? So, you know, that's the space that that I want to step into as I run this campaign. You know, it hasn't been easy, because I think I am fighting against the machine and the structures, right? And the machine and the structures say you have to look a certain way, you have to have a certain background, you have to have a certain amount of money and networks and all of that. So the machine works really hard to erase people that don't fit that criteria. And, you know, I made a decision early on, and, you know, I think maybe my life prepared me for this moment, right? Because I have been in spaces that weren't meant for me for a long, long time. And I'm, you know, cabecidura, and, you know, just sort of like, move me. I'm not going anywhere, you know? And that has, I think, served me well in this arena, because there are a lot of forces that seek to kind of convey the message to you that this is not for you.
Yes.
But I believe that it's.
I mean, that you get the phone call that tells you this is not for you.
Yeah. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. But I also, you know, I believe like it's a new day. Like this is for us, and, you know, the government is supposed to work for us and represent us, and it is our right and our responsibility to step in and claim it. And I just want to, you know, I want to ignite that in our communities, that sense of entitlement, because we are entitled. And that's what I want to speak to.
I just want to go back to the point of the fact that you are a second generation Latina. And I think that, you know, for me,
first generation.
first, one of your parents, were they born here or born there?
They were born there.
Okay, so you come here, you guys were here, you were born here.
Uh-huh.
Okay, está bien, okay. Pero what I'm saying is, you know, to see some, I know there's always a debate of what first, second, you know, what it is. But I think, you know, it's impressive, right, to see, you know, an Afro-Latina woman, right, making the decision, who's a born, bred New Yorker, to run for an executive position, right? And, you know, bring that voice, bring that vision to the table. So really, you know, I want to congratulate you on that, right? Because you're kind of like the first really to do that, you know? And I would love to hear more about, you know, how has it been when you've been talking to the various communities throughout New York City, right? We have, you know, Bangladeshi community, we have Southeast Asian communities, we have, you know, very diverse Latino communities, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Ecuadorian, Colombian. You know, how have they been receptive to your running?
Yeah. You know, I got to tell you that the average New Yorker across the board from those communities that you just identified, the ones that tend to not be part of what I call the political chattering class, right? The ones that sort of talk to each other in a vacuum. Such pride, like their eyes light up. And they get very, you know, there's that moment where they lean in and start asking you, like, really? And, you know, and they want to know more. And they're, because I think, you know, again, whether it's Bangladeshi or Mexican or Dominicano, like there's something in me that's more like them than anybody they've ever seen in leadership in New York City, you know, to date. And so there's a shared something that gets them excited and interested. The flip side of that is, you know, I have, and I could get in trouble for saying this, you know, I've been there from among the chattering class. I have been a little hurt by the extent to which people of color buy into the old norms and the old viability criteria and perpetuate that sense of you don't belong. You know, I thought naively so, I thought at the very least, and not to say, you know, I'm not suggesting that I thought, oh, people will be all in for me from day one just because I'm Latina, right? That's certainly not enough. But it's something. And, you know, for one of us to kind of be willing to do this, porque no es fácil. And, you know, the pride that I see on the faces of like a young Latina, young 20-something, when she taps me on the shoulder on the street and goes, are you Diane Morales? Are you the one running for mayor? You know, like that whole sense of like, oh my God, I'm so excited to see myself in you. I thought I would get more of that from the elders. And it, you know, it hasn't been what I expected or what I hoped for. It's not deterring me. But it does make me think about how much we get into our own heads about, you know, what it's supposed to look like and who it's supposed to be and that kind of thing. And, you know, it's been an interesting process in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, there's a lot of interesting Latinas who have run for political office who have absolutely faced the same issues that you have faced.
For sure.
You know, and, you know, the thing is, right, it's all about just, you keep going. You just keep going, you keep doing it and do it to the end. Do it to the end.
Yes.
So why don't you, you know, we have a few minutes left. Can you just, you know, tell me what your ultimate hope is if you become mayor? What would be like the first thing you would do if you win and you are sworn into office?
Nice, light, easy question, Raquel. I mean, I think about who, the first thing is, who you surround yourself with, right? I think it's really important. I've always really, really valued the notion of surrounding myself with people who I think are smarter than me. Because I think, that's one of those places where like the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that acknowledging and kind of recognizing or paying tribute to all the different kinds of intelligences and strengths that exist, right? It doesn't look one way. It doesn't mean that you are an Ivy League graduate, or that you lived here or that you did that. Like there is such a diversity of talent and intelligences. And I would want to really create, a diverse group of leaders, combination of, grassroots leaders, activists, policy wonks, like the whole thing, right? Because that's how I believe we come to the best solutions for the city. And then I would, obviously, I think given the economic conditions that we're going to be, that, I would be inheriting, taking a hard look at budget issues and really trying to figure out, okay, how do we start to get the resources to the communities that the communities need in order to really, really kind of move forward from this current crisis, right? To recover. And the first place I'm going to look is the NYPD budget, because I think that it's a bloated budget. And, I don't understand why that keeps growing when, the resources to everything else goes away. I don't understand why the expression defund the police is so controversial when people haven't had problem with defunding housing or defunding public schools. This is just
Planned Parenthood.
It's right. It's priorities.
Yeah.
What's important.
Yeah.
So those would be the things I would want to, focus on, is like making sure that I'm surrounded by the right people. Also making sure that I'm connected with groups on the ground, right? In real meaningful ways. I've been a part of a lot of mayoral task forces or commissions or whatever that are purely or primarily symbolic, right? To check a box, to, say that it was done. But I would love to see what it could look like if there were true partnerships and true collaborations with folks on the ground working towards the shared interest of elevating our communities. That would be what I would focus on initially.
That sounds wonderful. Diane, so I'm going to give you like a few more minutes.
Okay.
I really do want to thank you, for your time today, for really sharing so much with us. If people are looking to connect with you and your campaign, can you tell us where should they go? What should they do?
Sure. So they can get more information on the sort of priorities and a little bit more about my background at our website, which is www.dianne.nyc. They can certainly follow me on social media. All of my handles, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, Dianne, Dianne, the number 4, NYC. And, I'm going to say that if there's anything that I have said that is interesting or appealing to people and people want to hear more, the most important thing for my campaign is that we actually meet the threshold for matching funds by the end of this year. Because I'm not a professional politician, so I'm not sitting on millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars to do this. It's going to take all of us, and to qualify for the matching funds, which would give us an 8-to-1 match for, against New York City resident contributions. I would ask that anybody consider $10 or more. Anywhere from $10 to $250 will get us there. And that's really what we need right now. This is a people-powered campaign, and it's going to take the people to reclaim our power. So I'm hoping that people will support, if only just to keep my voice in this race, because I think that's important.
Well, thank you so much, Diane, for that. And thank you for sharing so much about you and about what you're envisioning for the future of New York City. And I just want to note to all of our viewers, we do have an upcoming election on November 3rd. There is early voting, so please make sure that you create a voting plan. Think about how you want to vote. If you have an absentee ballot and it's coming, get it in the mail early. If you haven't been able to obtain an absentee ballot, please make sure to get to the polls, whether through early voting. The earlier, the better, so we can assure that your vote gets in. And then, of course, on Election Day on November 3rd. So I want to thank Manhattan Neighborhood Network, the Firehouse, El Barrio Firehouse, for all of its work, our executive producer, Zenaida Mendez, Freddy Pinto, our studio manager, for all of the work that they do to make sure that we air bi-weekly. We will have our next show coming up in 2 weeks. We will be live on Facebook and on mnn.org. Again, thank you so much for your time here today. And really, this is a critical time, for our country, for New York City. This election and the election coming up in 2021, where we're going to see really a brand new New York City Council and a brand new mayor taking up all of these issues that are really critical to each and every one of us. So we should really all take the time to learn about all the people who are running and take the time to really see, how do we want to shape the future of New York City. So thank you very much.
Thank you.